My grandfather's name was Robert W. Haley, M.D. He preferred the pen name Ophiuchus when he was writing. This is a story entitled Dwy, which was written in 1996 and later compiled into a family collection by Polaris, who is my Uncle Jim. I will now read Dwy in its entirety. On a morn of bright September, in the year 2222, the funereal flotilla was gathering in the bay, to pay their last respects perhaps and down a mighty toast, before heading south to finally stash Bill Hennessy away. Bill had firmly told his wishes that his final resting place should reflect his love and interest in his upright fellow men, where we all could visit daily, either swimming or by boat, less of course the needle carried off the Beaufort scale of 10. Not the cemetery plot with its little stone flowers, or the crematory dreary with its flames all burning red. Cold storage is expensive, so are pyramids and tombs, but I'd like old friends around me when I know that I am dead. And lest Alice have a yearning for a covering for her plants, and I find that I am spread among the flowers and on sashes, I sincerely state I do not wish her plants or violets to be growing in a little pot containing all my ashes. He planned the daring deed for years with extra special care, first the coffin, the procession, and the grand celebrities. With glee he made arrangements and conceived his wondrous plot as he listed all the details of the special obsequies. Placed my Harvard hat upon me, of the glowing crimson felt, let my t-shirt bear an Aaron's green, my special motto Dwy. Faded shorts I've worn for clamming should complete my formal dress, and some old white sneakers on my feet to keep them extra dry. Let my coffin be of plexiglass, transparent, bright, and tough, sealed to keep the salty dampness ever from my feet. Fluorescent lights above shall keep the darkness away, so the world may stare in wonder and agree I'm really neat. Since the coffin will be heavy, several tons or even more, and the bottom will be ballasted with countless pigs of lead, I suggest the wake be held outdoors, perhaps upon the lawn, with an open bar kept flowing free beside my noble head. It will surely be a mystery how they'll winch me into church. All I ask is that they reinforce the foyer and the floors. I would hope the mass is simple and the vestments must be white, notwithstanding segregation in the current social mores. When the prayers are spoke and over, and the holy water sprinkled, let Maid Marian eulogize me, for I'd love to hear her say, he was diligent and kind, and he rarely padded figures, and he understood my stating, this has been a real good day. Have a flatbed truck to bear me to a sound and solid dock, with the TPF for escorts if the schools can spare a few. One last party at the dockside, then the journey can begin. But be sure in transit I should always have a perfect view. Let the funeral start from Boston, heading south toward Quincy Bay. A grand procession dressed in flags of tugs and ships and boats. As it lurches down the harbor, let the mourners all be gay. Past Manhattans and martinis for their parched and thirsty throats. Keeping Boston light to starboard, sighting Nixie's mate to port. On the Grand Armada east-southeast by bearing on the graves. Have a care for all the mourners, lest their spirited salutes should involve their tumbling overboard among the rippling waves. Let the skippers dip their colors as the pumping station nears, while we're passing on the starboard side the island known as Nut. Raccoon Island next comes into view along the Quincy shore as the gay flotilla staggers east across the wide west gut. I'll enjoy the view of Pettix and of course of Boston Light with its flashes and its mournful horn to guide us safely on. If the mourners seem attentive, have them lift another toast, for we reach the old red buoy that the seagulls cling upon. With a sharp right turn, not sudden lest the company should be shook, make a heading sharply southerly to enter Deer Hull Gut. Slowly steam in toward the high school and beyond's the sheltered bay, where my favorite aging rotting pier can just be seen to jut. Navigation is important, for I want my stately barge to be anchored very closely in the channel's middle reaches. Use the seawall for a landmark, and the currents and the tides should have stopped the funeral barge just equidistant from the beaches. Now is the time for one last cup, whether mead or ale or rum, as they gently lower my plexiglass into the foaming deep. Shouts and cheers and wild hurrahs will be heard from all the crowd, all except for those who are loaded and by now have gone to sleep. If the crews and ships are able, let them circle over the spot that I've deemed so very suited for my final resting place. If it's not too rough, the mourners should have quite a cheery sight of the great contentment evident upon my glowing face. Hope they'll make it back to Boston after such a lively trip. Most should now require some moments to recuperate and rest. If the trip had been successful, I would hope they'd have some fun, but I doubt if one could ever pass a breathalyzer test. At last the time had come to part, and Bill had said adieu, with a smile and gestures warning that no one should weep or cry. As he whispered his last statement for posterity to note, it consisted of the one immortal word that's known as Dwy. Now all was done as Bill had planned. The crowd was overjoyed, and we paid him little visits when the sea is not too mean. He just spends his time resting and keeping company with the kelp. I suppose he's got his version of the sailor's fiddler's green. So let him rest on the sea's soft floor amid the pogies and striped bass, and lend the gut of the town of Hull a wonderful touch of class. Unless some clumsy chucking dread should nudge his plexiglass, he ought to be good for a lot more years than Ozymandias. And that's the end of Dwy. Notwithstanding the sometimes awkward nature of the rhyme, pretty good. This is one of my grandfather's few finished stories, and one that does not require a close understanding of either our family or of the local surroundings of Greater Boston. For those confused on the meaning of Dwy, it is an acronym for Don't Worry About It. The style and contents are heavily influenced by the deeply Irish immigrant nature of my grandfather's upbringing, something he tried to hold on to long after the culture of the old world had faded away from the new world. My grandfather had a love for classical literature of all kinds. This same collection I have read Dwy from as a short poem concerning a specific disagreement found in the Iliad. This poem is written entirely in Greek. I'm telling you these things not to brag about my gigantic nerd of a grandfather, but to better explain the cultural context of the sea to my family, and by extension, to me. The poem is written about a very specific part of the Boston harbor that I lived in during the summers. My grandparents owned a dilapidated 3-story house on Hull. In Hull, the streets are by letter, beginning with A and moving eventually to Z. This house was and is on T Street. It is covered in a dark red paint applied before I was ever born. Its plumbing is elementary, and its heating system is non-existent. The lot value remains low due to the house not technically being along the beach, a quality that has also protected it from the harshest storms in quite a while. It is along the cold shores of Nantasket Beach that I spent all my summers with my cousins, swimming and reading more books than I can ever remember. We engaged at the sea all day, read and played along it, and then returned home in the evening. It is in this world that Robert writes Dwy, a clear yearning to become part of the sea, to give oneself up in death to the greater ocean, not separate from humanity, but as part of humanity. The sea and humanity is kept close by Bill Hennessy's plexiglass coffin, and the text even admits that some dumb trawler could upset the balance. There's a fundamental synthesis that Robert is reaching for, a desire to see two broken parts of the world come back together as one. Those summers I spent a lot of time listening and reading with my grandfather. I also developed an odd habit. With the advent of the underwater full face mask, I could hold my breath and watch the sand and hermit crabs at the shallow depths. I would float on the top of the water and take care not to upset the delicate surface of the underwater dunes. I watched hermit crabs move with the waves, using the consistent momentum to move great distances. I saw sandworms exposed by harsh waves wriggle right back into the sand, hopefully quite deeper this time. It was entrancing, and I continued to do it long after I understood that it was somewhat of an antisocial activity. So anyway, I saw Avatar last week. For me, Cameron played my emotions like a fiddle. A world fully realized, a full synthesis of life born from a philosophy alien to us, beyond our imagination. It's not some vision of fully automated luxury space communism or a primitivist best-case scenario. The people that come up with those kind of ideas have heads as embroiled in this capitalist machine as you and I do. I contend that, in general, our imagination is broken, but it can be rebuilt. James Cameron is, of course, on the top of the capitalist machine, an important element in entertainment media. He's realized he doesn't have to follow the greater algorithm of capital in whole, at least not inside of his creative output. Ironically, his position in the world allows him to critique it more wholly. At the end of the day, all these grand ideas arrive packaged into a $12 movie ticket that gets you 3 hours on Pandora. When it comes to the actual movie, there's too much to say. The text is dense, even if people want to pretend it's not. I'll defend that fully. The dialogue is sublime, from Quaritch's eternal recurrence of "you're not in Kansas anymore" to Jake's dumb father routine and big soldier boy vibes. Everyone is sure, everyone is clear. The only question is the path, the action to be taken. This feeling is also known as being alive, and you can feel it too. If you don't agree that the USA is the spear holding a worldwide capitalist order in place, that's okay. It can be more nuanced than that. But almost everyone has to negotiate their lives with the crushing forces of capitalism, and even if it's unsaid, most would prefer not having to do so. And that's the stupid, idiotic promise of Pandora. It has to be wrapped in sci-fi bullshit, because how else would our imagination make the jump? Nothing would seem real, because we still cannot fully imagine what can come after our world is gone, even if we have hopes for how it might look. Tell me, what's more evocative? You get to fly a spaceship around and hang out with your friends, or you get to fly a dragon around and commune directly with everyone and everything on the planet. The movie takes its time providing a fantasy of our own world so unreachable and sublime that yes, it simply entertains. It captures my fascination fully. For 3 hours I didn't do anything but sit still and eat from my large popcorn with butter, $9. Jake, and to an extent his children, are an attempt to bridge the gap, slowly cleanse a human of the stench our souls have been building up in this world. Jake's identity as Na'vi is never questioned by the film. He bears the marks of Earth in his speech and mannerisms, but nothing that affects his actions. Changing what you are willing to do for others doesn't annihilate the self, it only annihilates the part of you born from the economic machine. In Dwight, Bill Hennessy doesn't get to enter into the mind tree and become one with the world. My grandfather's version of this fantasy maintains a somewhat realistic nature, aside from the surreality of Bill's continued consciousness. The greatest attempt at an understandable infinity is made, but it's not whole. In the way of water, we all get to live forever in a beautiful Eden, built and continuing to be built by all people. A year after he wrote Dwight, Robert wrote Dwight Reconsidered. In it, Bill Hennessy, our friend from the earlier reading, loses his faith in his fellow man. He believes his friends will allow his final resting place to become polluted or otherwise destroyed. He instead wishes to be placed in a cathedral. To secure this resting place, he enters into a business deal with the Catholic Church to sell old catacomb bones to Americans that need bone transplants. This criminal enterprise spirals out of control as the mafia gets involved and the business explodes in popularity. Bill begins to purchase graveyards across England to keep up with the demand. The papacy becomes richer than ever. When Bill dies, the Pope himself arrives to bless his body, encased in the center of the cathedral. The Pope specifically asks for a local Boston cardinal who covered up the sex crimes of the church. And then after this, Bill is made a saint. So, a complete rewriting of the story, Robert imagines a different way to live forever. Use the machine. Become a capitalist for one's own ends, steal other people's bodies and sell them if you want a nice casket. The whole enterprise is horrid, and it is absolutely sanctified by the church. You can either live forever in Ewa, or kill Tukun mothers and steal their immortality juice. This is the ultimate choice, and sadly, yes, it is much harder, if not impossible, to become a true revolutionary and build a future like Pandora. Maybe the movie does nothing. Maybe it reinforces the unreality of a better world. Or maybe the idea that there is a better way of doing things, but it's going to take sacrifice, is an honorable emotion to spread to moviegoers. All I'm really sure about is what happened when I left the movie. At 10 p.m., I walked outside of the Patriot Place Theater, situated right next to Gillette Stadium. In front of my car were the actual miles of pavement necessary to convene large masses of people. All that pavement was empty except for my white 2004 Toyota Camry. On my walk to my car, I noticed a large crane clearly building yet another area to the gigantic Patriot Place complex. Nobody goes to Gillette except to see a game, or maybe locals like me seeing a movie and maybe getting a burger afterwards. It's a very alienating place, in my experience, always empty, but absolutely gigantic. All the bars are empty, and nobody's bowling at the bowling lane. All the stone and the pavement and the buildings just sit there without purpose. In truth, it's me and a mile of cement. It didn't really feel like I was on a real planet. It didn't feel like Pandora.